Hi, guys. Welcome to the Pre-Med Pod. I'm Sienna,
And I'm Maddie.
and we're very excited today to have Karli Gilbert on for our first episode. Karli, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So like they said, my name is Karli Gilbert. I'm currently a PhD student in neuroscience, and I am now entering my sixth year. Um, and basically, what I do is I work on a molecular and animal model lab, and I'm looking at depression related phenotypes in mice. And so I give the mice drugs. I look at both the molecular changes that are happening and I try to correlate them with behavioral changes as well.
Wow, that is deep,
It's
but that's
so
really
cool.
exciting. Yeah, we'll
I know.
definitely get more into what you do and how you came to study that. But to start, you know, of course, I feel like everything that you do has to come from somewhere. So tell us a little bit about high school and if that was a time that you started to get interested in medicine and science in general. What was kind of your high school career in a way like?
Yeah, so I attended a relatively small high school. It was in Fluvanna County, Virginia, which is about 30 minutes outside of Charlottesville, but one of the areas where the whole county just had one high school. I think my graduating class was maybe just under 200 students. Uh, and
Wow.
Mine has
yeah,
800, so
Yeah,
yeah,
mine's 750.
very small. And so like very rural. And the one thing that I kind of got to do that was maybe a little different from some larger schools, and I could be totally wrong, but I know a lot of schools have what they call governor schools, and it's kind of like a separate school that you go to for certain classes, and it's kind of like an additional curriculum on top of the normal high school classes. And so we had that, but we had what we called a Blue Ridge Virtual Governor School. And so the top 10 students each year got selected to do it if they wanted. And you had to join like 10 students from all the neighboring counties to kind of like make up enough to have this governor school. And so that was something I did on top of what I was just kind of doing normal in high school. And so it was interesting. It was very like I was a very self-driven, motivated high school student. I wanted to do everything, like club sports, top grades. Like I was in it if there was an option. I did it. I got to take a lot of like college credit courses while I was in high school, and that ended up being really helpful later. The high school, I think, because they had to devote a lot of resources to not necessarily the top students. There was kind of like we called the top 10% and then everyone else. And so the top 10% was kind of always wanting more, but they didn't necessarily have enough teachers for that. And so a lot of what I took ended up being online courses while in high school. And so, like, I was the only one who took AP Bio. And when I took the AP test, I was pretty much in like a guidance counselor's office, and she was like working in the background, and I was like only one taking the test. So it was interesting. It was definitely interesting. Very small school, but like I sought out every opportunity that I could. And I knew I really loved science. For whatever reason, that was just always the topic that was the most interesting to me. Um, so I kind of knew I wanted to do science, and I ended up getting voted most likely to save the world in the yearbook my senior year. That was my superlative.
Oh
And
my
so I was
gosh.
like,
we love
I
that.
guess I gotta, go into science, look at medicine. And that was kind of like my trajectory, like from high school, was like, I wanted to do something meaningful and I wanted to do it in science.
I think if I had to take an AP test by myself, I think I would actually just walk out after maybe 10 minutes. I was in a full room for my AP Lang test a couple months ago, and I it was just the most horrifying experience where I'm sitting in the giant library, everyone else around me is taking the same test, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what do I write about?
I
So
know we're
even
all
that,
like
but
looking at each other.
yeah, I remember at one point we went to the next page, and I forget exactly what it was about, but we all kind of looked up and was like, oh my gosh.
Oh no.
So it was nice to have the comfort, but wow. Yeah, AP tests are horrifying, and respect for AP bio.
Yeah.
That
I'm
is,
taking it next year.
that's
I'm really
intense.
nervous.
Yeah.
I am not.
I took AP Psych and AP Bio together, and they were both online.
Mhm.
And so I can't remember the order that I did it, but I think I did like I had back to back like computer room time. And so I spent like 3 hours every day taking this online course. And I pretty much did like biology throughout the week, almost every day, because it just was a lot. And then
Yeah.
over the weekend, I did like a whole week's worth of psychology.
Oh my
It was
gosh.
hard for me. And like I had to break it up because I was just like, it's so much, and I'm literally having to almost like not teach myself, but I had to pace myself. It was all just before Zoom, before all of that. I was, this, oh gosh, back in like 2014, 2015 doing it.
I
Yeah.
just took
How
AP Psych, and I'm like, if you have to do that by yourself, like teach yourself, it's really hard. But that's how I
Yeah.
knew a lot of neuroscience, like at the program, because I knew a lot of it from AP Psych. So like, if I didn't have my teacher there, I don't know how I would have known all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, how did you, like, because you were doing those online, were there any resources that you had available? Were there teachers that helped, or was it solely you and the internet?
It was me and the internet. We
Wow.
had one wonderful teacher woman who like ran the computer lab, but she was mostly there to make sure that like people weren't breaking the computers and like helping if the computer broke. Um,
Wow.
that was kind of it. Or if you were taking a nap, she would wake you up.
No, literally.
Yeah. Well, that's really intense. And I was gonna ask one more thing. Like, of course, you were in that second, what was it called? Sorry, that higher level school.
Oh, the governor school.
Yeah, the governor school. So with the governor school on top of regular school, and then I heard you said like clubs and sports and other things. How did you
Yeah.
overall really balance that? Or did you?
I, you know, I think I just had a lot of energy when I was younger. And I didn't do well with downtime. Um, it just kind of was like I would usually summer break was kind of like my time to relax a little bit. But then, yeah, I just didn't really feel like downtime was good for me. Now it's like the total opposite. Like I absolutely have to have time to relax and take a break. And it could also just be like I wasn't allowed to have a cell phone when I was in high school, and like I didn't have my own computer or anything. So it was also like a very different time of like if I wasn't doing something, what else was I gonna do? Like just sit and watch TV? I don't know. And so it was definitely hard. There were definitely a lot of days and evenings where I'd be on like a travel lacrosse team, and the place we were playing was, because we're out in the country and all the counties each only have one high school, and you got to drive like an hour and a half each way to get there, and I wouldn't get home until like midnight. But I
Yeah.
still have school the next day, so it was definitely really hard. Definitely had to be super organized to make sure that I was always on top of like when assignments are due, when tests are coming up. If I knew like, okay, I have a game tonight, so like I'm not going to have time to, I don't know, do XYZ. So I kind of had to make sure I was always organized. Like every single day I would look at my agenda and my calendar and be like, okay, how am I going to prioritize, I guess. That was the biggest thing, was like I learned really quickly how to prioritize.
No, I'm the same way. I don't like downtime at all. Like I was shadowing a trauma surgeon yesterday, and she's like, "What do you do for fun?" And I'm like, um I watch brain surgery on YouTube. And she's like, "No, outside of that." And I'm like, "I don't have time to do all that. Like, I have the podcast. I have a nonprofit chapter that I started. I have school. I like same thing as you. I take school really seriously." So I'm just like, even in the summers, I'm like doing neuroscience stuff and like science. Like, I want to do science. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But how I know how you said when we went at the program, I know you said that you like to like plant and do gardening. So when did you first hear about that? Because you said you didn't really have a lot of, well, you had downtime, but you didn't know what to do in the downtime in high school. So when did you really get into that?
So it's kind of interesting in that it was something I always liked the idea of, but never thought it would be something that I would do. And growing up, my grandfather always had a veggie garden in his backyard. And so when I would visit over the summers, usually we would go visit them in Illinois for like a couple weeks. And it was so much fun. And I absolutely loved like going out into the garden and like picking all the fresh stuff. And I just thought it was just like the coolest thing ever. And, you know, not that I didn't know that like you have to grow veggies, that someone grows the food that you eat. But I had never lived anywhere that actually had a like vegetable garden. The only gardens I ever saw were like flowers. And so I was just like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like you literally grew this corn in your backyard and it's so good. And so as I got older and started living in places that actually had like a bit of a yard, I was like, you know what? Let me try this out. Let me just wing it. I'm just going to throw some seeds in a pot and like see what happens. And it's kind of like gone way better than I think it could have ever gone. Like I never expected it to be as successful as it is. And even though like I know how to research, obviously, like I'm really good at researching, I'm really good at planning, I'm really good at all these things, but like gardening is the one thing I let it be. I just let it happen, and I learn from mistakes I make as I make them. I'm like, oh, well, didn't know that. Like learning that squash, any type of squash, so like pumpkin or zucchini or anything like that, they have male flowers and female flowers, completely separate. And the only way you'll get fruit is if pollen from the male flower goes into the female flower. And a lot of people do it by hand. And I didn't know that. And I was wondering why none of my zucchini were working. And I was like, oh no, it's me. And no, it just turns out it was something I just didn't look up. And it's kind of fun to trial and error it. Because I don't know, it's like, it's the one thing I allow myself to just be like completely blind to the process, and I just watch it happen. And I get shocked every time it works. Because it's just really fun. And I don't know, seeing it succeed makes me really happy.
So would you say that gardening is like a stress reliever for you in your like busy life?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
It's so peaceful, and it's kind of like I've created my little my own private safe haven of just relaxation, no technology, no anything. It's just like me and the plants and the bees.
I love that. I'm gonna research it because like I want to do something fun.
Yeah.
I never knew that there were male and female flowers. So now I feel like I've had a cultural reset here.
Me too. I'm like,
that is crazy. Yeah, my grandparents have a garden, and every time I go, they live in the UK, and we got to go over the summer for the first time in years since the pandemic. And they told me I would always eat their tomatoes just from the vines because that was the only tomatoes I ate when I was younger. I refused to eat tomatoes unless I was at my grandparents' house. And so I went back and I started eating the tomatoes again. And I was like, these are really good. I should try and do them. But where I live in Arizona, and It's about 120 today. So the issue is I have a cactus in my room, and that's about all I can take care of. Even that thing
Yeah.
barely survives. But it is really fun. It's cool to see them grow.
Yeah, for sure. I actually have kind of too many tomatoes growing right now. It's a bit much. But the plus side is you can make them into a really good tomato sauce, which I actually did earlier today. I had a couple pounds of cherry tomatoes that I roasted and blended it. Didn't even have to like add anything, and it tastes very good. I'm going to turn it into lasagna.
That
sounds amazing.
Yeah, that is so cool. Like, because you can always taste when it's fresh. You always know.
Do you kind of enjoy cooking and baking too?
I do. Actually, I really do. When oh gosh, what was it? I think it was in my second year of master's, first year of PhD. I switched my diet from, I guess like normal eating into a vegetarian diet. And part of it was I always had really high blood pressure, even though it didn't run in the family or anything. And I think it was just stress. And so every time I went to the doctor, they're like, you gotta calm down. And I was like, well, I am doing grad school. Like, I don't really know what you mean. And so I was like, okay, looked into it. And I'm like, all right, I think if I try to like eat healthier and eat primarily like vegetarian, that'll work. And it did. It really helped. And as a result of that change, I had to like learn how to make meals in a more creative way. Growing up, I always had like protein, vegetable, starch. And it was always like the same meal, just like swapped out a couple things. And so to have to actually like find recipes that I liked that made vegetables more exciting was really fun. And I've like, now I primarily eat vegan. And it's actually not hard at all. And I make like probably like the best food I think I've ever made in my whole life. And I don't really miss anything. It's just fun to cook. Yeah.
So like what kind of food do you make? Because I'm not even kidding you. I'm thinking about like not being regular. I'm like thinking about being like a vegetarian or like vegan or something, but I don't know what I'm supposed to make. Like,
yeah. So here's the science part of me. So I think it's like 8 or 9 proteins or amino acids that your body cannot physically produce. Otherwise, your liver basically synthesizes all the proteins that you need, and it takes food that you eat, which most things like it turns into glucose. It's also able to create the amino acids that your body needs to survive, with the exception of those like 8 or 9 amino acids that your body cannot make. And so you have to get them from your diet. And so ultimately it comes down to certain foods have more protein within them than others. That's true with meat. That's true with vegetables, etc. Like everything kind of has its own percentage. You can be deficient in certain proteins even on a meat diet, depending how you eat. So things like quinoa is what they call a complete protein. It has all of the ones all the essential ones that you have to eat in your diet. Beans and rice together also have that. I think there's one that like rice is deficient in that beans really high in, and one that beans are deficient in that rice is really high in. So that's why like every culture pretty much has a bean and rice recipe, because they actually do make the perfect pair. Anything with lentils, I do eat a lot of rice-based dishes, a lot of like rice noodle dishes, a lot of different types of like curries, especially. I like spicy food too, so that kind of helps. There's a ton of really good like Indian cuisine that is 100% vegan and super tasty. Coconut milk, when you cook it, doesn't taste like coconut at all, but it does get that like nice creaminess. tofu is actually really good. You just got to know how to like marinate it. You just got to like put a little love into it. It's kind of the same way if you ate like bland, unseasoned chicken. Like anyone would be like, oh, this is gross. So it's kind of like with tofu. Like no one eats plain tofu. Like you got to dress it up.
I am so proud of the tofu that I make. I'm not vegetarian or vegan, but my family does primarily eat a lot more plant-based dishes. And ironically enough, tonight I'm actually cooking Indian chickpea curry. And I'll send you guys a recipe if you want. It's super good.
Yeah.
But my tofu, I'm so proud of it. You put it in the air fryer after you cut it into cubes. And I made this sauce, and it has sriracha, olive oil, maple syrup, soy sauce, and it's like this like thick kind of sauce, and you put it with green onions. Oh my gosh. I thought like I was gonna have to major in culinary arts after that one. It was so good. And I was like throwing things together, and now every time I make it I'm like, I did that.
Girl, you need to send me that like now. Not now, but you know.
I will, don't worry. I had one other question, which is a little bit off topic, but I don't know. I think it's really interesting. Did you notice with what you were eating, like a mental change? Because I know like certain foods and with cooking and in general, like certain foods actually do affect your mental health with vitamins or antioxidants and stuff.
Yeah, I do think I ended up feeling like I had a lot more energy when I eat healthier. Like I'll still have days where I don't eat super healthy. Like I'll still have nights where it's like, oh, I don't want to cook and we'll just order pizza. And as nice as maybe that pizza is, afterwards I'm like, oh. It just feels so sluggish. I feel so drained. So having I guess they say eat the rainbow with your vegetables. The more plant-based that I eat, honestly, the happier I feel. I feel it's hard to just put words to it. Like I do just kind of feel like more fulfilled.
Yeah, I do think there's a cycle where it's like it's not like you are what you eat, but if you eat things that don't make you feel good, you don't feel good, and vice versa. If you eat things that make you do feel good, you feel good.
Exactly. I think one of the worst periods I had was when I had to do mouse behavior for 2 weeks, and I was doing it all by myself, and I was so stressed and low on time. Like I was literally spending maybe 8 or 9 hours a day at home. Pretty much got home, slept, woke up early the next morning, and was at school all day. Like I was spending way more time in lab than I was at home. And so I was not eating super well. Like I was kind of just like throwing whatever I could find in my mouth. And I was just like, well, all right, whatever, that's what I'm going to eat. And I felt horrible. And I really wish I would have like meal planned and better prepped. But I didn't realize like how busy I was going to be until it was too late. And then I felt like I was in this like trap, and I had a horrible time, partially because I was just eating horribly. I was just like, sugar and caffeine was kind of like the only thing I was consuming for 2 weeks. And yeah, I would not recommend. So eating as well as you possibly can is really important. And I always keep like a stash of snacks in my lab. Just because I never know what's going to happen. You just have to always prepare for the unexpected. And yeah, I'm never without food now because there's too many times I get just like hangry and I'm like too busy to make anything, to find anything. Don't have time to like walk and get anything. I'm like, no, it's either I eat this granola bar in like 2 seconds or I eat nothing.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I should start bringing like healthier snacks to school, like in my backpack. But anyways, going back to your lab, how did you figure out in undergrad? First of all, where did you go? And how did you figure out that you were interested in neuroscience and that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah. So I went to undergrad at Christopher Newport University. It's in Virginia, between Williamsburg and Virginia Beach area. I went there and I knew I wanted to major in biology. And that was something I was like 100% dead set on. And they had a couple of different routes within their biology department. And so I went the cellular molecular route. And as I was studying that, I don't think you officially declared your major in your second year. And so I got to my second year, and it was at that time that my dad ended up getting diagnosed with ALS. And so that's a neurodegenerative disease, and it's unfortunately fatal. It has no cure. There's a lot of research still being done on it. But from that moment, having already knowing that I wanted to do biology, I looked into some of the classes and professors at that university that were also doing kind of more neuroscience based classes. And it was just starting, I think, that year too, that they wanted to start up a neuroscience program. But because it was so small, you could do it as like a second major, and you could like add it on to something you were already doing, but you weren't able to be like a neuroscience major alone. So that's when I added that on. And so I technically was a double major in college.
That's
Wow,
super,
that's
yeah.
intense. But
Yeah,
again,
it was a
really,
lot.
yeah, wow, but really cool. And I think it's always really cool when people are able to kind of bring personal events into their career. And I think, at least for me, even now noticing, I feel like there's things, what I personally am interested right now in public health and environmental science. And I do think that by where I live, everyone says the Arizona sunsets are like the most beautiful. And what people don't know a lot is it's actually caused by all of the emissions and the dust in the air. And I think, you know, by living here, I'm like, wow, environmental science is really taking a toll on people's health. And so that's something that I'm interested in pursuing. And I think it's really cool that with people's careers and studies in general, it comes from like most of the time personal experiences and stories. So that's really cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that is super
And
cool.
not to say that if someone doesn't have like a traumatic or somehow personal connection to science, like they can
Yeah.
still be great scientists. I just always find that when people have a personal connection, I think it really helps when times get maybe overwhelming or, you know, really stressful. I think having that connection is really helpful.
Yeah,
No,
like a lot. Going a little bit also into your college and med school and, you know, graduate school, how did you choose Georgetown and what was the whole application system like in general for that?
Yeah, so I didn't realize that I wanted to do research necessarily until end of my junior year in college. And so I joined a lab and I got like as involved as I could in my last year. Um, I kind of swung for the fences and I tried applying to a bunch of schools for PhD programs right out of undergrad. And because just I was late in the game, didn't have enough research experience. So I didn't get in anywhere for a PhD, but I did get into American University for a master's degree. And it was a 2-year master's program. And I wanted it to be kind of local enough that, like, from where my parents were to DC, like, wasn't horribly far away, but it was far enough that, like, I wasn't going to run into them. Um, I love them. Not that I don't want to ever hang out with them or anything.
That's funny.
Couldn't be too close. And I found a woman there, Dr. Victoria Connaughton, and she was so cool. I loved her lab. Got accepted, was really excited, and from there, I like was able to kind of have my own independent project. Got really into research, worked with zebrafish, and honestly, like had so much fun. I really loved it. Like as hard as the science was, I think like everything failed like 5 times before I got anything to work. I was like, okay, yeah, I can see myself doing a PhD because like the research was fun. I like enjoyed what I was doing, and I wanted to kind of stay local. At that point was when I knew when I was looking for programs, I was really looking at like the DC area, and so I applied again to a decent number. Not as many before because I wasn't willing to like move across the country at that point. Um, but I ended up getting in offers for two different places. So one was to stay at American University and do my PhD there. And the other one was Georgetown. And it was really exciting for me because I went from being rejected from everything to having two options. And so I just kind of went through each interview process, tried to like reset my brain of like, okay, where do I think I could see myself? And with Georgetown, I just got this sense of a larger community than what I had at American. And I really liked how like collaborative all of the professors were with each other and how collaborative like all the students were, and the relations between the PhD students with the faculty was very like peer to peer. It didn't really feel like, I don't know, I guess how you would feel probably with your teachers as a high school student. Like they're very much your teachers, they're higher up. With my PhD, it's a lot more like peer to peer. Like they are still, you know, above us. They still have all the experience and everything, but there's a level of respect that like I'm treated as a grown adult. And it's really, it's an interesting dynamic that I think it's not until you go through it that you start to realize like the more into science you get, whether that be medicine or research, I think the more mutual respect and like love of ideas and collaborating that comes out, and that kind of trumps what year you are, how old you are, like how many years experience you have. I think having that kind of openness and acceptance in any profession like that is a good indicator. I think it's a really good sign, and it's important.
So I have a question actually. So
Yeah.
we're about to go through the like college admissions process, and obviously the master's program it's different than undergrad, but how did you like push yourself forward even though you were rejected from all those schools for that program?
So something that kind of came up for me, and everyone's different. I, after getting rejected, but getting accepted to the master's, because I applied to it as like a backup, not thinking I would need it. But make sure you kind of have a backup plan of some sort. Got accepted, ended up having to defer for a year, and spent a year at home as a caretaker for my dad. So it wasn't necessarily like the experience in terms of like getting to do research, etc. But I was like, it's what I got to do. And they were really understanding. They were like, of course, don't worry about it. Like, do what you got to do. We'll see you next year. So I kind of had like a whole year of like focusing on something that was kind of like very personal and mostly unrelated to the science, to I guess like lick my wounds and not be too terribly upset. Kind of gave me some time to like read articles and try to keep up with the science on like my downtime, I guess. So yeah, it definitely sucked. I had many days like when I was a senior in undergrad where I would get the rejection emails or letters and I would just cry in my room, and you know, it sucked. Like there were days that it just sucked, and I was like, well, there's nothing I can do. But yeah, I took the time I needed, but I also made sure I had a good backup plan just in case. And kind of like having that year, I think helped me to suck it up a little and be like, all right, you know what? didn't want to have to do this, wanted to go right into a PhD, but that's okay. Like, wasn't my path.
Well, to see like where you are now with the research and like the success that you've had, it just like gives me hope because I'm like, okay, doesn't mean that you have to go where exactly you want at first. You can take some
Yeah.
time, you can have a backup plan. So,
Like, as you get further and wherever you end up, you will find that there is no one mechanism. Like, everyone has done something different. And just as long as you make the most of wherever you go and whatever you end up doing, like, that's kind of all that matters.
Yeah, I think I'm so big on everything happens for a reason. And so obviously there's definitely things that suck, but it all works out. I mean, like there's certain things that I think in life just they were if they weren't meant to be, it wouldn't happen. And so I that's what I try to remind myself. Of course I haven't gone through any of that yet, but I'm trying to mentally prepare.
Yeah. And you got to remember too, like, there are so many great people in the world, and unfortunately, like, it is a competition. But like, for you and just anyone, I guess, listening to this, like, if you don't get something and you get rejected from something, just know it's not necessarily because you weren't good enough. It's a number of factors that no one can predict and no one can fully prepare for. And kind of like you were saying, that what's meant to be is meant to be, and you'll end up where you're supposed to be. But it's not so much on you. There's just so many great people with similar experiences, with lots of passion, and it's not a like slight against you as a person. And it's really tempting to fall into that I wasn't good enough. It's just, for whatever season of application, for whatever reason, like, one person's resume was maybe a little more what someone was looking for at the time, and that can change year to year. That's something that, like, being in a PhD program and helping with student admissions every year, it changes. Like, the number of students we accept changes, the type of students that we accept changes. So like, we kind of have more cognitive neuroscience and a lot more molecular neuroscience. So depending on how many openings we have in the labs will determine what more of one type versus another we get. And like, that has nothing to do with how great the people that come through are. It's just sometimes there's not enough spots. And it makes me sad sometimes when we have to say no to someone. I'm like, oh my God, you'd be so great. But it's like, we just don't have enough space. So just always remember there's so many factors that go into these things that, like, honestly, sometimes it really is just luck and timing.
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Which can suck, but it's also just like, just go, like, it's not personal.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think there was a book, and I forget what it's called, but it did say something along the lines of if you were rejected from somewhere, it's not because you weren't qualified, it was because they were looking for a different person at a different time. And I think that's a really good piece of advice because, I think it also just, it takes the edge off a little bit where it's like, you know what? It wasn't that I'm not good enough. It was just not the right place at the right time. And I think that gives you peace of mind.
Yeah.
And branching off a little bit, we'll go into, again, your studies and research. And I know you said in the beginning that you study and do a lot of your research on mice. And I wanted to ask, why mice? Like, what? It must be something with their brain that's pretty similar to people or the drug, how it reacts. So do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So we use mice in the lab, and part of it is because they have a lot of conserved brain regions, and primarily the connections that are similar to what we see in humans. And even though they are vastly simplified from what humans have, they do have it enough that if we want to probe kind of a basic circuit, it's easy to do that and see if there are any changes or effects as a result. And so we didn't want to go too quote unquote simple in animal research. So we didn't want to necessarily do the fish because they don't have quite the same like reward mechanism and dopamine receptors that we do, but mice do. We didn't want to do fruit flies because, again, like very different and oversimplified from what we wanted to look at. And then that kind of only gives a couple options in the other direction. Could do rats. They are. This was not really my choice so much as my mentor does not want to work with rats. She views them more like pets and that they are too sentient. They are significantly smarter than mice. And so she does not have it in her heart to work on them. There are people at Georgetown who do work on rats, and they are very sweet. But she doesn't want to work on them, which I totally respect. And then we do have macaque monkeys in the lab. Not our lab, but in the animal facility. And it's very difficult and expensive to work with them. And you maybe would only get like 1 or 2 subjects total. So like for something like what my research is, it wouldn't really make sense. They do a lot more like purely behavioral without necessarily like manipulating anything.
Okay. So I know a little bit about it, your research, but Sienna and the listeners don't really know too much about like the research design and the end goal, like the ideal goal. So could you go into that a little bit and just explain the research experiment?
Yeah. So I guess the quick and dirty of it, I am looking at a dopamine agonist that specifically acts on receptors that are in the limbic system of our brains and that are primarily what are involved in our reward system, but we know are systems that are downregulated in patients with depression. And so ultimately we want to find what the mechanism is behind why this dopamine agonist seems to be helpful in patients with treatment-resistant depression. So people who are taking multiple different types of antidepressants, but aren't finding any lasting successful results. There's also a bit of a information gap that we're trying to fill. So I primarily just look at female mice because we know there's certain sex differences in the brain, genetically, molecularly. They kind of act different, and most, if not all, studies that I've looked at with my drug does it only in male mice. And so I'm trying to just fill in the gap. It could be exactly the same, but if you don't look, you'll never know. And so as a result of activating these dopamine receptors, we want to see if the changes we see are pathways and changes that are consistent with mechanisms of other antidepressants, or if it's something totally different. And this, by knowing this, by answering this can help better understand how and why certain drugs are more successful than others. There's a lot of pharmacodynamics that go into drugs and how they act on receptors. So certain ones, maybe they bind longer or they bind a different subtype of a certain receptor. And that's why maybe they're more successful for some people versus others. And so we want to know, are the changes that are happening from my drug, is it affecting the excitability of these populations, which ultimately everything we're looking at is, does it reverse what we typically see go wrong in depression? And so are we increasing excitability? Are we changing the extracellular matrix that would allow for more plasticity? Are we seeing an increase in learning and memory capabilities and short-term memory? Are rewards more rewarding? If I give the mouse an option to have something sweet versus not sweet, does my drug make them want more of the sweet, rewarding thing, or does it not? And that was something that I actually found. By giving this drug, it did. They consumed more of the sucrose water, which was really exciting because that indicates we are alleviating a bit of what we can consider like a depressive-like phenotype. So we can't say that mice have depression. We can only say they have depression-like behaviors. And so that's what I look at. And then I try to look at changes in certain molecules that we know decrease in depression or increase when they shouldn't, and see if those things reverse. And I've found a couple proteins that have, which is exciting. And it kind of indicates that even though this is a potential antidepressant that works on dopamine receptors, it might still be changing some of the same things as like SSRIs. And that's why we're seeing this beneficial thing. So if we find more drugs in the future, we can try to support the certain outcomes or like certain variables that scientists should look at to be like, oh, well, if you want this to be successful, make sure that this changes or make sure that this is targeted. And then that way we have more options for people.
That's really interesting. And how long does it take from the beginning of your research to publishing? Because of course you have all the experiments, and then of course with your results and outcomes, you have the entire writing process and publishing. My stepmom recently, she's publishing some research, and it's been a very long process, and she more primarily looked at studies. She didn't fully do the experimentation and the research. So how long is it from A to Z?
I feel like this is the answer everyone hates. It depends.
Yeah.
If everything goes smoothly and you get results quickly, and ideally if you get like exciting results that make sense, then could be relatively quick. You could, if you finished, say, a whole set of experiments for publication within a year, which is doable, especially depending how many people you have working on a project, it would still then take probably another year after that before it was published, because there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into you write it up, you put it in the format that the journal wants it to be in, they go through and edit, they have people who review it, you get the reviews and comments back on whether or not it was good enough, or a lot of the times reviewers will want to see more experiments, so maybe they're like, oh wow, this is really great, but we're not convinced of this. And so they'll usually ask for like more controls, more backup studies of like, oh, well, you said this goes up, but what if you block this? Like, would it still go up? Or like they'll get really nitpicky about the details. And so depending on like how thorough the experiment was in the first place will also kind of determine how much extra work would have to go into it. Sometimes it is just, oh, edit the paper, like we just want it to be more streamlined, or it's too long, make it shorter. So it kind of depends. But yeah, it usually will take a bit of time before it does get accepted and then published.
No, yeah, I did some research a little bit this year, and I'm trying to get it published, and it's like a whole thing. You have to rearrange the formatting, and I have to go and fix. I know I have to change some stuff because if I want it published, I can't have I tried to break it down. It was for AP research, so I tried to break my the statistics part down so that the readers could understand it, because I didn't know who was going to read it. But now I'm like, if it's going to go into a journal, I probably should take that out. But you were talking about the details. So I thought this was so cool when you were explaining it during the program, when you were telling us about like the mazes you made for the rats and stuff, or mice, not rats. Sienna, you're gonna love this. Okay, can you explain that?
I'm excited.
Yeah. So I was working with a strain of mice called Valve C mice. And these mice, they're like white albino mice, and they're very anxious, or anxious-like. And so in certain conditions, they'll kind of act the opposite that most mice would react. So usually mice like new things. They like new places. They want to explore. They're very curious. The white mice that I had were kind of the opposite. They hated new things. They hated new environments. And so in a very classic setup, is called an elevated plus maze. And two arms are closed. And so they have like these really tall walls so they can't see, and they feel like very like protected. And then the other two arms are open, so there's no walls. And usually mice will, they'll hang out in the closed part, but then they will eventually venture into the open to see what's up. My mice did not. They like refused to go in it. And I was like, okay, interesting. I need to come up with a way to probe, like, how willing are they? And like, is it having to do with like what they're familiar with, what is safe? Like, how do I figure this out? Can't really ask them. And so I came up with a exploratory maze kind of thing. I literally made it out of cardboard in an old aquarium. So it was really fun. It was kind of like arts and crafts. And I gave them 4 corners and a center. And so the center had nothing. And then 3 of the 4 corners, I put new objects that they had never seen before. So they were just like little like baby toys. And so they're like bright and colorful and different shapes and textures. And then in the 4th corner, they have these like little red plastic domes that's in their home cage. And so I took that and put it in as well. And so with each mouse, I like put them in the very center, and then I just recorded like where did they spend their time. And I found in my treated mice that they spent significantly more time looking at the new objects compared to the familiar home cage. And that was not the case with my untreated mice. Some of them kind of looked at it, but most of them just hung out with the thing that looked and smelled familiar. So it was fun to like kind of create a bit of a design. I did look at a lot of papers that had done similar types of tests, usually with rats. But I was like, you know what? I bet I could make something.
That is so cool. Wow. I never really thought about research in that way, but it is really like it's creative. You can really kind of, I'm assuming, being in, your research, like you can really do whatever in a way like that you think to kind of see results, and that's really cool. So that's fun.
Yeah.
I think that's really unique. And I haven't really done a lot of research, but that makes like I want to start doing research. Like that's really cool.
I know, it's so fun. I told her what after she was explaining it to us, like our class, I was like, "Oh my God, can you come on our podcast?" And I was like, "This is the coolest thing." She's like, "Oh, I don't know if I'll be." I'm like, "This is so cool. Like I love this."
No, and it's so fun too, because you think that if you like repeat what other people did, you're going to find something similar. And more than once, I have found just weird results that like didn't make sense, didn't fit with the literature. And I had to kind of come up with, what does it mean? Like, backtracking, I went over everything and I was like, okay, I don't think I did anything horribly wrong. I don't know, count it incorrectly or anything. So like another example with these mice was a T maze. And so it's literally just the shape of a T, and you put them in the very bottom of the T and they make a choice to either go left or right. And it's supposed to test short-term memory, where, say, if they went left, you take them out, put them back in the starting point, they'll remember that they went left. They were not going to want to go to the same place. They want to go somewhere new, and they should go right. And that's the premise behind the test. Except my mice don't like new, unfamiliar territories. So if they did make a choice, they typically kept going back to the same place that they had gone before, and they just did not want to go to the other side. My untreated mice spent almost every trial just sitting still. They just refused to move, which was really frustrating. So they had, it was like 0.05, like 2 or something. So like almost significant, basically significant. Made more no choice trials, if that makes sense. Like they just decided to not move. They didn't want to make a choice. They just stayed where I put them. Compared to my treated mice, which did decide that they wanted to make choices. I think only like 1 or 2 times they kind of sat there. I think they got bored. If you put them in the same maze over and over, they kind of decide they're like, this is not fun anymore. But when they did make a choice, they would typically alternate between choosing left and right. Whereas the untreated, if they did, when they made a choice, they typically just kept going back to the same spot. Probably because they remembered that it was safe. I don't think it was necessarily they didn't remember where they had gone before, which is typically what that test is thought to measure. I was like, no, I don't think they just are dumb. I don't think they just like forgot where they were going. I think they just are scared and they don't want to explore anything new. So you kind of get to like interpret things. And you have to like look at all the pieces of a puzzle to be like, what does it actually mean? Because in theory, I could just be like, oh, well, they did the T-maze and they didn't remember, so they're dumb. And it's like, no, I think they actually did. They knew what they were doing. They just didn't want to do what they're like, quote unquote, supposed to do. And the fact that I did see a difference between my controls and my treated animals, I think to me indicates that like it's alleviating enough anxiety or negative attributes and affect in these animals that I get to see a difference.
That's like
whether or not it's memory, still kind of up in the air, up for debate, but it does seem like it's doing something.
It's so cool. I just love it. I love research. I think it's so fun. I'm like, I have to go to college, like, and medical school at like a really good research institution because I have to do research. It's like so interesting to me. But so just to clarify, the treated mice were the ones that had the medicine in their water and then the untreated didn't, right?
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
So did you ever like have like a weird moment where you like lost track of like which mice were like which? Because I would be so nervous. I'd be like, oh my God, wait.
Sometimes, yeah. So I never actually mixed them up, but I would always do tests in a certain order. And so I think at most I only ever had like 4 cages at a time. And for each mouse to know which one was which, there's different ways you can identify mice. And so I tried to go with like the least upsetting option. So I used a Sharpie to mark their tails. So like right at the base of the tail, I usually did like 1 red stripe, 1 blue stripe, stuff like that. And I was usually pretty good at being like, okay, I'm doing a control mouse. Cool. I'm doing a treated mouse. Cool. And like I would try to always like have the same thing. But every once in a while, like halfway through, I'd get like, wait, was this treated or untreated? And then I have to go like back to the cages and start counting like how many mice, like which one has the missing mouse. So I knew like to put it in the correct one. Because I know like if I put a mouse in and they both have 1 blue mark, I'm not going to know who's who. So I tried to make it so that even if I forgot as I was doing it, there'd be a way for me to go back and tell.
There's like one mouse off the charts, just
Like running
doing
around
its
the
own
lab.
thing.
No, but it sounds so like based on organization, and you said that you had to be organized in high school, so I'm like it ties in together. So yeah.
Yeah, it really helps. The better you label anything, the more thankful future you will be.
Yeah. After this piece of research, which of course, research is a very lengthy process, are there any other bits of research or studies that you're interested in?
Like in general or with my project?
I guess in general, like once this project or your research ends up kind of coming to a close, or you end up branching out into something different, what are some other avenues that you're interested in researching?
Yeah, I guess if I were to continue with the research route, um, something that I initially started when I came to Georgetown, but ended up switching labs. My initial thesis project, which I'm still excited about, is this idea of senescence in ALS. So senescence is a normal biological phenomena that our cells experience. Usually when they get too old or damaged, it's kind of a protective response that prevents future mitotic replication. And so it's meant as kind of a way to prevent things like cancer from developing and spreading. It's also genes that regulate that process. When they go wrong or they get mutated, that's usually where like cancer comes from. So it's very closely related with cancer research. But something that a lot of studies and researchers, especially in neuroscience, have been exploring, and I'd say it's still relatively new, is this idea of senescence in the brain, in a lot of neurodegenerative disorders. And so the idea being that cells that go senescent, while that could be good in terms of like we're not having replication of something bad, they also kind of become what we call zombies, and they don't die either. And rather than undergoing apoptosis, they become senescent. And so they're still metabolically active. They're still kind of like creating problems. So, like, rather than just dying or signaling to other cells, like, hey, this guy's got to go, it's actually sending out more signals, more inflammation, and kind of telling all the cells around it, like, hey, you should be senescent too. So just like zombies, it kind of makes like a little zombie apocalypse where it is. So like it's not a good thing in the brain for the most part. And so something that I was really interested in with all that background is if in ALS, motor neurons that control the movement of your eyes, which we taught you guys, the cranial nerves. I was interested if those cranial nerves, which are usually spared in ALS, they're usually not affected, while all the other motor neurons are, if it had something to do with senescence. And there's a lot of information on P53 specifically, but there's different isoforms of P53, and that's a cell cycle marker. And you can have more of a good isoform and less of a bad one, and that kind of like drives what's happening in the cells. And so my theory was that the astrocytes supporting those motor neurons were going to have more of this like delta 133 P53 isoform compared to affected areas. And so I really wanted to get like brain tissue from like brain banks of patients who had ALS. I wanted to look at like conditional knockout of like TDP43 in mice. Like I had this whole project lined up. It was gonna be a lot. But I was I still am excited about the idea of this. I'm like, I feel like it's such a simple question, but like no one's ever looked at it. And I want to look at it. Like, even if I'm wrong, I just need to know.
No,
Yeah.
that's like amazing. You should definitely do that
And
after this.
that's really cool that, there hasn't been research, like much information on that yet. So that's
Yeah.
really cool. And I think that's something that a lot of people forget is like research and theories are all changing and evolving and growing. And there's a lot of gaps in, medicine and in research in general. One thing I learned pretty recently actually is that with over-the-counter medications, for example, like let's say if someone's taking some Tylenol, the recommended amount for adults was most likely tested on adult grown men. And of course, for women, and technically speaking, I'm in the adult range for over-the-counter medications, like probably what's meant for me is not going to be meant for an adult grown male. So I think it's really interesting that there are gaps there, even though, I mean, we have come so far in research and studies, but there's so much to learn.
Yeah.
So that's really
the
cool.
biggest thing with like both the advancements in technology and like microscopy, and just the more we learn, honestly, the more we learn that what we don't know. Which is it's like this fun paradox of like it's really frustrating, but also like there's so much still to figure out. But then it's frustrating. It's like we've been studying this for so long. How do we still not know? But like I don't think research will ever end or go anywhere. Like there's just so many awesome studies out there that just haven't been done yet.
And like speaking of gaps, like gaps can be anything. Like when I was doing my research, that was the big thing that my teacher was like, you guys have to have a gap. That's like the whole point of research. And people were like, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. Like it could be like literally just testing a population at a school that hasn't been tested. Like that easy, like that's just because mine was in school. But like gaps don't have to be some like huge giant thing that a lot of people our age stress out about when they think of research. Like it could be anything. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, I mean, you told us that you're thinking about doing more research in different avenues in the future, but are you currently like satisfied with where you are right now with your research? Is there anything that you know that you want to do for certain in the future? Anything like that?
That's a good question. So it's kind of a bit of a yes and a no. I think ultimately I always had a bit of a question in the back of my mind of like, is research the route for me? And personally, I don't think it is like I don't see it as my career. I think I'll always be like research minded and like a scientific brain. I'm always going to think about just anything. Like if I'm feeling sick or something, I'm just like, okay, well, what changed? Like I always use that as like little variables, and I don't think that's ever going to change. But when it comes to like what ultimately makes me kind of feel like fulfilled and what do I find meaning in, I found through like from my master's program all the way to now, which has been like the past 8 years, I have learned that I really love teaching. I love just getting people younger than me excited about science, or hopefully getting them excited about science. Getting people to have that kind of aha moment of like seeing someone learn something, and just getting to be part of like helping the future of science like progress. That I feel like we just need more really passionate teachers, and I like to think of myself as one, and I really enjoy it. I find a lot of meaning from it, and it's also something that like with it throughout my research, I've always found a lot of great support and feedback from other professors. So like people who weren't even necessarily like doing research, or they weren't even doing like my research. They've always been really helpful. And so like I want to be one of those people that's like in an environment that I'm helping more than necessarily like doing the research itself.
No, I think you would be a great teacher. I'm not even going to lie. You were explaining all this stuff at the program over the summer, and I'm like, how do you know all of this stuff? But it's like not even just that, but you're very like welcoming too. So it's like a lot of teachers are like rude and mean, and I'm like scared. But I was like, I understand this, and I actually like learning about it. So
yeah,
you should definitely pursue that. I recommend.
Thank you. I don't think if I didn't go through research and PhD, like I don't think I ever would have figured that out either. Like, so I'm not mad or grumpy about the route I took.
No, I think it's so cool to like you have to take paths to get to different places. Like you said, everything happens for a reason, so you had to go through all this to find that. And you had to do that anyway. If you want to be a professor or anything, like you already have it.
Exactly.
Well, I think we're going to slowly start to finish this episode off, but we do have a little thing that we're going to do at the end of our episodes, and it's going to be like a kind of a rapid fire. And so it's just 3 questions, but you can answer them however short or long you like. And yeah, so I'll get started here. So the first one is, what is one piece of advice you would give your high school self?
High school me, if I could go back and talk to her, I would say that I guess it's kind of a 2-parter. I'll cheat a little. I'll say no matter how hard things get, it always gets better. It always does. As hard as anything is, like it always gets better. And that burnout is a real thing. And the amount of energy and mental fortitude that you have is not always going to be the same. It will change. Your capacity will change over time, and that's okay. That's normal. If you're going to compete with someone, don't compete with the world. Just try to compete with your past self.
That's really good.
That is so good. I've never heard anyone say that, like, compete with your past self, but that's so true. Like, if I look at myself, because, I'm always, like, competing, like, not competing against, but I'm always, like, comparing myself to other people. So if I take a step back and I'm like, me last year, and now I'm here, that's so much more constructive.
I even had that, like, not too long ago. I was really down on myself seeing a lot of the people who joined the PhD program the same year I did. More than one has since defended, and now they are Dr. So-and-so. And the fact that I had to change labs and it kind of set me back, and I'm still working, and then, seeing all the data that they had and being like in awe. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna amount to anything. Like, I don't even have half of what they did. And, just immediately comparing myself and thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible. Like, I have nothing, which isn't true. I had to stop and literally look at myself like a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and be like, remember when you had no data? Very different. You've gone to 2 conferences. Like, you have to kind of just remind yourself that, like, your growth is, like, as long as you're growing, like, you're doing something right.
I always hear comparison is the thief of joy, and I think that holds very true. So I really like that, and I do like burnout is real. I think I feel like I sensed burnout for the first time last year. Junior year was absolute pain for me, and I think that was the first time where I realized it is so important to actually take breaks and prioritize yourself, because one thing I always hear, and I think this is also really true, is like, if you are not your best self, you cannot expect yourself to help other people and to perform your best. And I think that's so true. I mean, if you aren't putting yourself forward and your mental health and yourself in general, it's gonna hurt you in the long run. And so
Yeah.
I really like that burnout is very real. And I think I needed that reminder 6 months ago.
No,
Yeah.
and how you were just talking about like having breaks and stuff, it kind of leads into the next question. How do relationships play a role in your life? Like, do they provide you with like some time outside the lab? Are you always talking about science with your friends? Like, how do relationships in your life help you get through times that might be stressful?
Yeah, they're critical, like absolutely necessary. I mean, everyone is different. Some people are like closer with family than others. But yeah, if I didn't have my, now husband to go home to keep me sane, and like my best friends outside of school that are not scientists, and then also like really good friends within science, like having a little bit of everything and someone I know I can go to regardless. And I can just be like, hey, can we like hang out and not talk about science at all? And I know that they'll reciprocate that, and they'll be like, absolutely, I also need time away. Or to be like, I need to vent about science, and they'll be like, cool, me too, let's go. So like, it's true that no one's ever alone. And you're never alone with your struggles, that like other people are going through the same thing, even if it doesn't look like it. So having those relationships, I think, are really, really crucial. Because there was many times where I thought I was the only one having an issue, and then it turned out everyone was having the exact same issue, and I was like, oh, well, why are we talking about this? And so yeah, like I don't think I could have gotten even half as far as I have if I didn't have like solid people to go to. And I don't have a ton of friends, to be honest. Like, I only have a couple, but like they're really, really strong friendships. So like, no complaints here.
No, I totally agree. I only have a few, and like Sienna, for example, like she's one of my best friends. So I'm like, we needed that question because it fits for us too. But no, I totally
Yeah.
agree with you. I only have a few friends, but they're really good friends, and I know that if I need to talk about school or anything, I can. But if I don't, like, I can do that too. So, and they're all over. Like, some of my friends
Yeah.
live in California, some live in Arizona, some live in Florida where I live. So, yeah.
It's definitely the quality over the quantity in people. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's amazing. And I agree. I like the friendships where also you can go maybe a month or two without being as in contact, and then you pick up and it's right where you left off, and
Yeah.
you can go to them for anything.
No,
That's
it's so
great.
true.
Our final question is, what is the biggest challenge you're facing right now, and how are you tackling it?
Yeah. So I'll be super transparent and open, because I can. Is that so one of the biggest hurdles that I like I think, knock on wood, got over, was that in February, I was so concerned and so worried and so stressed, and I was not giving myself a break. And even when I did try to give myself a break, I was still so worried that I wasn't actually relaxing. And I just say that like my brain broke, that I had panic attacks for a month straight, every single day, and had to go seek counseling and medication and the whole nine yards. Finally got on a medication that is working and helping, and that took some time. It took many months, and that's okay. But yeah, after a lot of practice and a lot of therapy, a lot of meditation, a lot of trusting the process, exposure therapy, you name it, got diagnosed with a panic disorder, and I feel like finally, like, I am back in control of myself, and having to, like, truly honor, like, how my brain is feeling in addition to my body, just the same way that, like, if you worked out really hard and your muscles are super sore, like, I feel like sometimes I think maybe a little too much, or like I worked a little too long, and I have to kind of recognize that, like, my brain muscles sore, you know? So it was hard, not gonna lie. I was out of the lab for a couple months straight, just dealing with my mental health. But I finally feel like I am back on top of things. Like, I am recovering from it, and I feel much better than I did. I've gone from worst point in my life, never felt worse, to, like, I actually feel really great right now. So, yeah,
Oh, that's
I don't know.
so
Like,
great.
no matter what, like, it always gets better.
Yeah. And
True.
this is a very off-topic question, but I know you do research on, psychiatrics and drugs with mental stuff, and hearing that you were on, or still are on, I'm not sure. I'm not going to assume a psychiatric medication, but if it is, how does that, I think there's a big stigma around it, and I do think it's unfortunate because they are so helpful. So as someone who researches, what's kind of your, I don't want to say view on them, but do you notice that should there be that stigma around them that there is, or,
I think it's very unfortunate that there is. Something that I learned as I was struggling through it initially. And I think it's pretty well known that most SSRIs, it takes about 6 weeks or so for it to kick in. So that really sucked, waiting and struggling through that time of waiting for medicine to hopefully kick in. And I learned in that process of the people that I did kind of open up to about it, that a lot of people are also on medication, that they also struggled with the medication and the side effects. And it was just something that, like, I never would have known, because I guess it's not really something people talk about, which is why I'm kind of more open about the fact that, like, I had a panic disorder. It felt completely out of my control. I wouldn't even be panicking or thinking about anything, and my body would completely have a panic attack that was, like, lasting for hours. It messed with my appetite. I ended up going on one medication and learning that it just wasn't, like, I wasn't tolerating it very well. Switched over to a different one. Now I feel much better. But, like, I was getting so dizzy from the medication that I couldn't even stand up. But I was like, okay, well, I don't think this is the panic. I think this is the medicine. And then, trying to figure out, like, well, which is it? Is it because I'm, my brain's sick, or is it just not responding well? And, it's a whole process that takes a lot of time. And, having the people, the support, the knowledge helps. Like, I learned from friends that, like, I should take it with food so it doesn't, like, affect me too adversely, even though, like, my doctor didn't say anything about taking it with food. The prescription bottle didn't say about taking it with food. Like, nothing had said that. But, like, multiple people, I was like, yeah, I took it before I ate anything, and they were like, oh no, that was your problem right there. And so it's, like, very anecdotal, but, like, helpful. So, yeah, I really think people, if they're willing and able to be a bit more open about it, because I think there's just so many people ultimately kind of going through very similar things. And I think it only makes us stronger and makes the whole process easier. Yeah.
I totally agree. I have anxiety and OCD badly, both of them. And it wasn't diagnosed until, I would say, like 2 years ago. So a long time ago, when I was not a super long time ago, I would say like 6 years ago, I went through like a period where I would not want to leave my house. I wouldn't want to walk my dog. I wouldn't want to leave. I wouldn't want to go to school. I wouldn't leave like my parents. Like, if I was like in Target, I wouldn't leave them. Like, I remember going with my friend once, and she'd be like, why don't you want to go to the gum section? Like, my mom's like right there. I'm like, I don't want to go. Like, I don't want to go. But once I finally like got my diagnosis, it felt like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. And then I got my meds, and they're so helpful. And I know if I haven't taken them, I could feel it, and I take them and they help me right away. And it's just like, I don't think people are, I feel like people now are more open to the conversation as they were a few years ago, because as I'm finding out, like, a lot of people are on medication and they don't talk about it, but a lot of people are on it. And I feel like the stigma is so unnecessary. Everyone goes through their own struggles, and a lot of people are dealing with the like similar, if not the same thing. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's really funny because I was just asking, and actually this is kind of cool because I didn't know Maddie had this, but I actually have really bad anxiety and OCD too, and I'm actually getting prescribed SSRIs today. So I thought it was really cool that, because I was so scared of them for a really long time, because I do think people are taught, oh, it's just like, for example, anxiety and OCD, they're definitely a much, I don't want to say minor mental disorder, but there are people who are able to manage it without medication, and I tried, and it is something that people are like, oh, well, if you can just do it on your own, that's fine. And so I thought, oh, I can just do it by myself and I'm fine. And I realized, I do need extra support with that. And so I've opened up my mind to it, and I do think that there needs to be a stigma around just, it's okay. It's, in a way, it is temporary. I mean, there can be withdrawal, but it is all temporary, and it's only there to help you. And so I think it's really cool that we're able to talk about it more openly and be open to things like that now.
Yeah. I mean, and I think a lot of it was because me knowing who I was in high school and like what I'm quote unquote capable of, and having to deal with the fact that that changes over time, which is fine and normal. But I developed a lot of anxiety about it, and developed both generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder. And the only thing I'd say I regret truly is not having gotten help sooner. It literally took me breaking in my body, physically not being able to do anything, that got me to get help. So like doing much better now. So happy I did. I just wish I would have like gotten on medication sooner. I kept thinking it's going to get better on its own, or I can push through it, or I pushed through it before, so it's fine. And like, no, we do need to take it seriously. Like if I broke my leg, I wouldn't keep walking on it. I would go to the doctor.
So true.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's like it for us. We learned a lot. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions for us?
I guess where would I find this? I guess the podcast, so I can like see you guys in the future.
Yeah. So we are on. So first we have Instagram at the Pre-Med Pod. We post our episode releases and little updates on there. And then to listen or watch, we are on Spotify and YouTube, both at the Pre-Med Pod. And we will have it linked in our Instagram as well for people to watch and see. And yeah, we're super excited for this first episode. I think this was a really great conversation. We learned a lot. Also learned about your gardening, which now I'm very intrigued to do some research on.
Same.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Oh my gosh, of